The Dominion Command Center was alive with flashing red lights and blaring sirens. Officers rushed between consoles, their movements frantic as they struggled to make sense of the impossible readings appearing on their screens. Something had just exited hyperspace near the outer colony of Vornis 7, but it wasn't like anything they had ever encountered before. At first, the scanners failed to classify it. But as the readings stabilized, the truth sent a ripple of unease through the command deck. The vessel was massive, heavily armored, and radiating power levels beyond anything in the Dominion's database. Then, after an agonizing pause, the identification system locked onto the hull structure and translated its markings. A moment of silence followed before an officer, his voice shaking, finally spoke. It's human." A wave of disbelief spread through the room. Humanity? That insignificant, primitive species from the Sol system? The Dominion had labeled them as minor traders, barely capable of interstellar travel. Their ships were supposed to be slow, outdated, and fragile, certainly nothing worth fearing. And yet, here it was, a warship of unknown design. The crew stared at their screens in stunned silence, the realization settling over them like a suffocating weight. No one had ever seen a human warship of this scale before, and the implications were terrifying. Had they miscalculated the true power of humanity? Before anyone could fully process what was happening, an emergency signal came from the patrol fleet stationed near Vornis 7. "Unidentified warship, you have entered Dominion space. Identify yourself or face immediate consequences." The message was laced with forced authority, but the commander sending it knew the truth. No one had the confidence to engage something they didn't understand. Still, Dominion protocol demanded control, and control was maintained through force. A formation of 7 Dominion destroyers moved into position, surrounding the human vessel in a crescent formation. It was a textbook maneuver, designed to overwhelm a target with precision fire. But the warship didn't react. It simply floated in the darkness, unbothered, almost as if it were watching them. Seconds stretched into minutes, the tension in the command center thick enough to choke on. Then, without warning, the warship moved. It was fast. Too fast. Dominion ships were built with cutting-edge propulsion systems, yet the human vessel outmaneuvered them with impossible ease. One moment it was in the center of the formation, the next it had shifted, positioning itself behind the lead battleship in the blink of an eye. Gasps filled the command center as officers scrambled to adjust their targeting systems, but it was already too late. The warship's forward cannons began to glow, a deep red light pulsating from its core. The Dominion ships opened fire in panic, but their energy blasts did nothing. Shields absorbed the attacks effortlessly, as if they were mere insect bites against a giant. Then, a single shot was fired. The Dominion battleship vanished. No explosion. No debris. Just a bright flash of red energy followed by absolute nothingness. The massive warship that once led the fleet was gone, erased from existence as if it had never been there. A stunned silence filled the command center. Eyes widened, hands trembled, and for the first time in Dominion history, fear crept into the hearts of its officers. One of them, voice barely above a whisper, muttered what everyone else was thinking. What kind of weapon was that? But there was no time to answer. The remaining Dominion ships, realizing the full scale of the threat, abandoned formation and began retreating, their engines burning at maximum capacity. It was not a strategic withdrawal. It was pure, uncontrolled terror. The human warship drifted back into position, its dark silhouette towering over the remnants of the once proud Dominion fleet. A transmission came through. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a declaration of war. It was something far worse, a single, cryptic warning. The transmission, though garbled and static, carried a voice that was calm, steady, and absolute in its certainty. This is only a warning. Do not follow. Do not resist. Do not test us. Then, just as mysteriously as it had arrived, the transmission ended, leaving the Dominion forces in stunned disbelief. Word of the incident spread like wildfire. Within hours, high-ranking Dominion officials were demanding answers, scrambling to understand how an empire that ruled half the galaxy could be brought to its knees by a single warship. But there were no answers, only questions. Where had humanity been hiding this power? How long had they been preparing? And most importantly, was this just the beginning? Voronus Seven's skies remained eerily silent, the human warship hovering like a specter, unmoving yet ever watchful. The Dominion had underestimated humanity. And now, for the first time in centuries, they were the ones who felt powerless. Panic spread like wildfire across the Dominion fleet. The destruction of their lead battleship had shattered their confidence, and now fear had taken hold. Officers barked desperate orders, their voices shaking as they tried to form a new battle strategy. Weapons were locked, targeting systems adjusted, and shields raised to maximum capacity. But deep inside, they all knew the truth. None of it would matter. The human warship was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It had erased a battleship in an instant, without leaving so much as a fragment behind. No Dominion weapon had ever displayed such power, and no Dominion fleet had ever faced an enemy they couldn't even scratch. Yet, despite their terror, the fleet had no choice but to stand their ground. The Dominion had ruled for centuries through strength, and surrender was not an option. If they retreated now, the entire empire would see them as weak. And so, with every ounce of false courage they could gather, the commanders prepared to strike. The fleet's capital ships moved into position, their massive ion cannons charging up with a blue glow. Destroyers and cruisers surrounded the human vessel from all sides, ensuring there was no escape. Smaller fighter squadrons were deployed, swarming like angry insects, their pilots determined to overwhelm the warship through sheer numbers. The Dominion believed in overwhelming firepower, and if brute force was the only option left, then they would unleash everything they had. The order was given. All ships, fire. In an instant, space was ablaze. Thousands of energy blasts streaked through the void, converging on the human warship from every angle. Plasma torpedoes detonated in brilliant bursts, shockwaves rippling outward as ion beams carved through the darkness. The Dominion had unleashed a storm of destruction, the sheer firepower enough to turn moons into rubble. The bridge of the Dominion flagship lit up with alerts as sensors tried to keep track of the damage. But something was wrong. Amidst the blinding flashes of explosions and energy fire, the human warship remained untouched. The Dominion officers stared in horror as their weapons had no effect. The warship's shields absorbed every blast without even flickering. Even the most advanced Dominion warships would have suffered under such a bombardment, yet the human vessel did not flinch. It didn't evade. It didn't counterattack. It simply endured. It was as if the Dominion's most powerful arsenal was nothing more than rain against an unbreakable fortress. The realization sent a chilling wave of silence across every Dominion ship. The enemy was toying with them. Then, without warning, the human warship retaliated. A single turret, sleek and unassuming, adjusted its angle. A low hum resonated through the void, a vibration so deep that even the Dominion sensors picked it up as an anomaly. And then it fired. The energy beam was not like any Dominion weapon, no fiery plasma, no crackling ion discharge. It was a thin, precise line of red light, silent, almost elegant. But the moment it touched the Dominion cruiser in its path, the results were anything but graceful. The cruiser's hull disintegrated instantly, metal and armor vanishing as if they had never existed. There was no explosion, no debris scattering into space, just erasure. The ship was there 1 second and gone the next, as if reality itself had decided it no longer belonged. The Dominion fleet froze. No one moved. No one fired. Every officer, every pilot, every soldier watching the battlefield realized the truth at that moment: they were completely and utterly powerless. The Dominion's military, a force feared across the galaxy, had just witnessed something beyond their understanding. And then came the next strike. The human warship didn't unleash a full barrage. It didn't need to. With surgical precision, it fired again, and another Dominion destroyer simply ceased to exist. Another shot, and battleship was erased from the fleet. Each blast was delivered with chilling efficiency, each kill deliberate and controlled. The human vessel wasn't just annihilating the Dominion, it was demonstrating something. It was showing restraint. It could have wiped them all out in an instant, yet it chose to eliminate them one by one. The realization spread like a virus through the Dominion ranks, and in that moment, discipline collapsed. Some ships broke formation and fled. Others, their commanders, too paralyzed by fear, sat frozen in place, awaiting their inevitable fate. The Dominion pilots, once the proud warriors of a galactic empire, were now reduced to frightened survivors scrambling for escape routes. There was no longer a battle, this was a slaughter. But just as the human warship prepared to fire again, a message echoed through every Dominion channel, cutting through the chaos with terrifying calmness. Stand down. This is your only warning. The voice was deep, emotionless, and absolute. It carried no hatred, no malice, only certainty. The Dominion had never been given a warning before. They were the ones who gave ultimatums, who decided the fate of others. But now, for the first time in their history, they were the ones receiving a choice. Surrender or be erased. The fleet's commander, his face drenched in sweat, hesitated for only a moment before making the only decision left. Cease fire. All ships retreat. It was not a military maneuver. It was not a strategic withdrawal. It was the purest form of survival instinct. The mighty Dominion fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, had been broken by a single warship. As the surviving ships engaged their jump drives, fleeing into hyperspace with desperation, the human warship did not pursue. It simply watched. Its presence alone had dismantled an entire fleet, and it had done so without sustaining even a scratch. As the last Dominion ship disappeared into the void, the warship remained a silent, unstoppable force, waiting for the next fool who dared to challenge it. And across the galaxy, as news of this battle spread, every Dominion world trembled at the same realization. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was the beginning of something the Dominion had never feared before, a superior force. The remnants of the Dominion fleet tore through hyperspace at reckless speeds, their engines burning at maximum capacity. Fear clung to the air inside every ship, the silence on the command decks more deafening than any explosion. No one spoke. No one dared to. They had seen the impossible, a human warship, a single vessel, had decimated their forces without effort. It hadn't just won the battle, it had dominated it in a way no one could comprehend. The Dominion's most powerful warships had been erased from existence, like dust swept away by the wind. And worst of all, the humans had given them a choice: surrender or vanish. The Dominion had never been given such an option before. They had always been the ones to dictate fate, the ones to crush opposition without mercy. But now they had become the prey. The fleet's commander sat frozen in his seat, his claws gripping the armrests so tightly that they had left deep marks on the polished metal. His mind replayed the battle over and over, searching for some flaw in his strategy, some moment where he could have turned the tide. But there was nothing. Nothing. The human warship had not fought like any known enemy. It hadn't needed reinforcements. It hadn't needed to dodge or defend. It had simply endured. Their most powerful weapons had been useless. The fleet's most advanced shields had meant nothing. The humans had evolved into something else, something beyond the Dominion's expectations. And now they knew the terrifying truth: humanity was no longer a minor species. It was a force that could challenge the Empire itself. As the fleet approached the Dominion's core territory, a single command echoed across all channels: send a priority warning to High Command. Now! Officers scrambled to transmit the data, their hands shaking as they relayed every detail of the battle: the appearance of the human warship, its impossible firepower, the way it had erased entire vessels in an instant. But how could they even explain what had happened? How could they describe an enemy that had fought with the cold precision of a god? Even the most hardened generals would struggle to believe it. And yet, the Dominion had to believe. If they didn't act now, if they ignored the warning, they would soon find themselves at the mercy of an enemy they couldn't defeat. Moments later, the transmission was sent across the galaxy. The message spread like wildfire, passing through military outposts, intelligence centers, and high-ranking Dominion officials. Every detail was analyzed, every piece of footage reviewed, but the result was always the same. This was no exaggeration. This was no false report. The destruction of the fleet had really happened. And if one human warship could bring an entire Dominion battle group to its knees, what else were they hiding? What other nightmares had humanity been building in the shadows? On the Dominion homeworld, where massive war councils gathered in towering citadels, fear gripped the highest-ranking officials. These were the same leaders who had once laughed at the thought of humanity being a threat. They had dismissed humans as mere traitors, insignificant beings who could never match the might of the Dominion Empire. But now they were silent. They watched the battle footage in stunned horror, witnessing their warships crumble like paper before an enemy they had underestimated for too long. One by one, the warlords turned to face their Supreme Chancellor, awaiting his command. What should they do? Attack? Surrender? Prepare for war? But the Chancellor simply stared at the holographic image of the human vessel, a dark, faceless juggernaut floating in the void, watching them, waiting. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with realization. "We have made a mistake." The room fell even quieter. The Dominion had ruled for centuries without challenge, yet now those 4 words carried more weight than any declaration of war. A mistake. A fatal one. They had seen humanity as weak, as unworthy of attention. But instead, they had awoken something beyond their control. Far across the galaxy, in a system untouched by war, the human warship drifted in silence. It had not pursued the Dominion forces. It had not sent any further warnings. It simply existed, like an omen of destruction waiting for the next fool to test its patience. Deep within its armored hull, unknown to the rest of the galaxy, a single message was being transmitted back to Earth. The contents were simple, but they carried a weight that would shake the entire Dominion to its core. Engagement complete. Enemy fleet neutralized. Awaiting further orders. And somewhere, in the depths of space, humanity prepared for what would come next. The Dominion had always believed that war was about power. The strongest fleets, the largest armies, the most advanced technology, these were the things that had built their empire, the things that had crushed weaker civilizations under their rule. Fear was a weapon they had wielded masterfully for centuries, forcing lesser species into submission before a single shot was fired. But now, for the first time in history, they were the ones who were afraid. And that fear was spreading like an unstoppable virus across the empire. It began with whispers, stories from the survivors of the lost fleet, rumors of a human warship that could not be harmed. Some dismissed it as lies, the ravings of broken officers who had fled a battle they could not win. But then came the footage, grainy, distorted, yet undeniably real. Entire Dominion warships erased in an instant, their strongest defenses useless, their most powerful weapons ignored. The sight of their once mighty battleships vanishing into nothingness, as if they had never existed, was enough to shake even the most hardened generals. And worse than the destruction itself was the way the humans had done it with cold, deliberate precision. The Dominion had always relied on overwhelming force, but the humans? The humans had chosen their kills, striking with terrifying efficiency. They hadn't simply won the battle, they had demonstrated a lesson. A lesson that sent a single, undeniable message across the galaxy. Resistance is pointless. Surrender is survival. For the first time, the Dominion found itself trapped in the very nightmare it had once inflicted on others. Planets that had once feared them now hesitated. Their vassal worlds, once loyal out of terror, began to question their rulers. If the Dominion could not protect itself, how could it protect anyone else? The power they had wielded for so long was crumbling, and the cracks were growing wider with each passing day. The fear that had once been their greatest weapon had been turned against them by humanity. The Dominion High Command gathered in a war council, their finest strategists and military minds desperate to find a way forward. Their Supreme Chancellor sat at the head of the room, watching as his commanders debated, shouted, argued. Some called for an immediate counterattack, demanding that they strike at the humans before their influence spread any further. Others, more cautious, warned that such a move could mean total annihilation. They had no idea how many of these warships existed. If a single vessel could shatter their fleet so effortlessly, how could they hope to survive against an entire armada? The room fell into uneasy silence as the realization settled over them. They knew nothing about human warfare. That, more than anything else, was what made the humans truly terrifying. The Dominion had spent centuries studying its enemies, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, always staying one step ahead. But humanity had been a blind spot. A species they had ignored, dismissed as unimportant, unworthy of concern. And now, that ignorance was costing them everything. What else were the humans hiding? What horrors had they prepared for war? The thought sent a shiver through the room. Then, as if the universe itself wished to answer their fears, a new message arrived. A transmission, no encryption, no secret codes. Just a simple, open broadcast sent directly to the Dominion's homeworld. The High Command held its breath as the holographic display flickered to life. A human figure appeared. Not a soldier. Not a politician. Just an unknown face, calm, emotionless. And then, in a voice that echoed across the silent chamber, the message was delivered. This is your only warning. You cannot win. You will not win. Surrender now, and you may yet survive. Defy us, and you will cease to exist. The message ended. The image disappeared. But the fear it left behind did not. The Dominion's rulers sat frozen, realizing the truth. This was not just a battle. This was a psychological war. The humans were not just stronger, they were smarter. They understood something the Dominion had never considered, that the greatest weapon was not firepower, but fear itself. And in that moment, the High Command knew the Dominion had already lost. Panic spread like wildfire across the Dominion. What had once been an empire built on strength and control was now unraveling, its foundations crumbling beneath the weight of a single, undeniable truth: they could not stop the humans. Fear had seeped into every level of their society, from the highest war councils to the lowest soldiers stationed on distant outposts. No one knew where the next attack would come from, or if it would come at all. But that uncertainty, that dreadful silence, was worse than any invasion. It was as if humanity had taken the Dominion's own weapon, fear, and perfected it into something far deadlier than any fleet or army. The first real cracks appeared when the Dominion's outer colonies stopped responding. At first, High Command thought it was a communication failure, a minor issue in the vast network that connected their empire. But then came the reports entire planets had gone dark. No distress signals, no evacuation warnings. Just silence. Fleets were sent to investigate, but they found nothing. No signs of battle, no wreckage, no survivors. It was as if those worlds had simply vanished. The Dominion had spent centuries conquering and subjugating planets, leaving their mark on every system they touched. But now, someone else was erasing that mark. And there was only one possible culprit: the humans. Terror gripped the Dominion's vassal worlds. These planets had once feared the Dominion's wrath, obeying every command to avoid destruction. But now, something far worse loomed in the darkness. The humans did not threaten. They did not boast. They simply acted. And their message was clear: this is what happens to those who stand against us. Fear turned to rebellion. Dominion governors found themselves abandoned by their own people. Their planetary defenses turned against them. The fleets that once patrolled the borders of the Empire now found themselves trapped, hunted. Some officers tried to rally their forces, but most realized the truth: this war was already lost. The Dominion had ruled through fear, but now that same fear was driving their empire to its knees. In the Dominion capital, chaos erupted. The Supreme Chancellor stood before the War Council, his once commanding presence now overshadowed by desperation. His voice shook as he demanded answers. How could this happen? Where was the enemy? But no one had an answer. The humans had not conquered the Dominion in the traditional sense. They had not launched grand invasions, nor had they occupied territories. They had simply destroyed what they needed to and left the rest to collapse under its own weight. The Chancellor clenched his fists, his mind racing. They needed a solution. A counterattack. A surrender. Something. Anything. But then, as if fate itself had decided to mock them, a new message arrived. It was brief, as all human transmissions were. Just a single sentence broadcasted to every Dominion-controlled system in the galaxy. The war is over. The Dominion no longer exists. Silence followed. A cold, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on the entire chamber. For centuries, the Dominion had believed itself to be invincible. Now, in just a few simple words, the humans had declared otherwise. And the worst part? It was the truth. There were no fleets left to fight, no armies to command. Their empire had been shattered, not by a war of blood and fire, but by something far more terrifying. A war of fear. The Supreme Chancellor fell back into his seat, his breath shallow. He had always imagined that if the Dominion were to fall, it would be in some grand, heroic battle, a final stand against an overwhelming enemy. But this was not a battle. This was an execution. A slow, calculated eradication of everything they had built. And as the Dominion's last remaining systems fell into chaos, as warlords turned against each other in a desperate attempt to seize power, as once loyal commanders abandoned their posts, one thing became clear: the future of the galaxy had changed forever. For the first time in history, the Dominion was gone. And in its place, in the vast darkness left behind, there was only one force that remained. Humanity. You said,